All right, welcome into Panther-Lair podcast. For this week, it's good to be back. I apologize that I didn't, if you are one of the folks who like to tune in for the live stream on Tuesday nights, I apologize. 2 weeks ago, I didn't give you a heads up that I was going to be out of town last week, and I wasn't going to be doing a live stream podcast from the Outer Banks on Tuesday night. I mean, I could. It would have been a real mess because when you go to the Outer Banks and you go with a lot of a lot of family and you got a lot of kids in the house and you have a house, you tend to spend the later parts of your afternoons and sometimes the early parts of your afternoons and certainly throughout the evenings having a few cold ones. So if I had sat down at 8:30 p.m. last Tuesday night and started taping a live stream, it would have been one for the record books. I'll say that. I don't know if anyone would have actually enjoyed watching it, and quite frankly, I probably would have tried to erase it as quickly as I could instead of letting it live on the internet, because it would have been, who knows, it actually might have been more entertaining than than a lot of the other podcasts end up being. I mean, most of our podcasts, we just end up sitting here, we talk about Pitt. It's not very lively. It's not very exciting, at least, I assume. I don't know how it sounds on that end. But that one certainly would have been, it would have been a little more lively. I mean, I know what my conversations with people were like throughout the nights, in the evenings on that trip to the Outer Banks, the vacation I took last week. And so maybe it would have been a little more lively. But we still had a podcast last week. Hopefully you got a chance to check it out. We released it as just the audio podcast, kicking it old school, going back to before we started doing these live streams. And, released it on Wednesday morning, and it was just sort of I joked, I taped it before we left to go to the Outer Banks, and so I joked that I was like Chappie in Iron Eagle, recording it, and well, if you're hearing this, things must have gone really bad. Well, nothing had gone bad, I just was out of town, and so I taped the podcast ahead of time, so it would be one less thing to do, but I could still put out some content, and it ended up just being me kind of musing about the 2020 season, not necessarily saying things we haven't said before, but sort of summing them all up. Just kind of hey, it's the middle of June. Here's what we're really thinking about this 2020 season. I think I got into some different topics as well, and ended up being, I think, probably a decent podcast. Hopefully you got a chance to check that out. If you didn't, you should look into it. Also on Friday, I released another podcast. I released two podcasts while I was on vacation. Neither of which was taped while I was on vacation, but they were both released while I was out of town. And on Friday, that podcast was our Friday Conversation series. We talked to E.J. Borghetti, Pitt's sports information director, and I highly recommend that you check that one out. We had this sort of series of those Friday Conversation podcasts really over the last 3 weeks, and they're all people who are really, really passionate about Pitt and really connected to Pitt. And it was E.J. Borghetti last week. I think the week before we had Donna Sampt, who's a longtime Pitt administrator. Her history with the University of Pittsburgh Athletics goes back into the 1970s. She helped shepherd women's athletics into the athletic department in the early 1970s. Women's athletic programs at Pitt were part of the phys ed department. They weren't even part of the athletic department. And so Donna Sampt, as Title IX came to be and started to have an impact on college athletics, she helped usher women's athletics into the athletic department. And so she's been around for a long time. She's seen a lot through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s into the 2000s. I thought she had some great insight and knowledge to share, so you should definitely check that out. And then the week before that, we had Sam Shulo, who's the preeminent Pitt historian, a guy whose passion for and knowledge about Pitt really is unparalleled. And it just so happened that it was, that week Johnny Majors passed away, and I thought, you know what, I've been waiting to get Sam Shulo on the podcast. That was the time to do it. And Sam delivered better than I could have hoped. I mean, just outstanding stuff. We're going to have Sam on the podcast again on these conversations. We won't do it right away, but we'll have him on a few more times, because he was really good, as I knew he would be, as I hoped he would be, and he certainly delivered. So go check those out, because what else do you have going on right now, right? I mean, you can listen to Sports Talk Radio if you want, and what are they going to be talking about? Major League Baseball playing a 60-game season. All right, that's a real topic. There's no real topics in the NFL right now. And, at some point you're going to hear conversation about, social justice issues in NASCAR. And you can listen to all those things, and all those things are interesting and entertaining. But you could also, if you're a Pitt fan, which I presume you're watching this live stream on Tuesday night or listening to the podcast, I'm presuming that you are a Pitt fan, unless you just have some weird sense of curiosity or you're one of the many Penn State fans who follow me on Twitter. Because, again, I guess maybe out of your own sense of curiosity. But if you are a Pitt fan, I highly recommend you go check out those 3 Friday Conversation podcasts. I'm not going to beat the drum too much for my own podcast and say, oh, you got to go listen to what I said last week or what I said the week before. But go check out the interviews with EJ and Donna and Sam. Listen for them. Because, I mean, I'm just the, I'm the, I mean, you could have written the questions down and handed them a piece of paper and they could have just gone, spoken at length about those questions. I played a very small role in those interviews. I'm the delivery system, and I got it to you. So go check those out. Hopefully you get a chance to give them a listen, because I think if you're a Pitt fan, I think you'll enjoy them. I think you'll find them to be informative and insightful, and you'll know more about Pitt and Pitt history and have a better sense of the people who work behind the scenes at Pitt after listening to those podcasts than you do going into it. So hopefully you get a chance to check those out, and hopefully we've got another good one for you this week. We haven't recorded one yet. The EJ podcast, the Donna podcast, the Sam podcast, we had those pretty well in the bag before Friday got there. We've got some things in the works for this week, and hopefully we get another good Friday Conversation podcast out to you. So like I said, I was out of town last week. Went to the Outer Banks Sunday to Sunday. It was a great trip. We had a lot of fun, stayed put in the house, in the pool, in the ocean, and pretty much didn't venture out beyond there. But I got lucky because there was no major Pitt news. And if you've followed Panther-Lair.com for a long time, or even a short time, you know the trend that I go out of town, I go on vacation, and things happen. I always sort of famously tell the story. I was in Aruba for my wedding, for my honeymoon 10 years ago. And it was over the summer. We got married in late May and then went on our honeymoon a few months later. We didn't go right away. Went a few months later. And I'm in Aruba, and I'm like, okay, I'm on this one happy island. I'm on my honeymoon. My phone is going in the safe, and it wasn't as crazy with social media then as it is now. It wasn't as constant, but I mean, things happen, news happens. But I said, I didn't even take my computer on the trip. I said, I'm putting my phone in the safe. I'm locking it, and I'm not getting it out. I'm not bothering with it. This is, we still had a little digital camera. If I wanted to take pictures, I could use an actual camera to take pictures. So I said, I'm putting it away, and I'm gonna just spend this week enjoying this week and this trip with my wife, my new wife. Like midweek or so, I didn't get my phone out because I didn't care. It didn't matter what was on my phone. I don't even know what the carrier fees were like in Aruba in 2010. But at one point midweek, I was like, I'm a little bored. I'll walk down. They have this little business center, you know what I mean, in the resort where we were staying. I'm gonna walk down and just take a look at the website. I'd spoken ahead of time with Josh Sickles, who was the guy who wrote for me at that point, and and put something on the message board and told people, look, I'm gonna be out of town for a while. I'm going on my honeymoon. I'm not going to be around on the message boards. And everyone was very understanding. Josh had everything under control. He was very capable. I said, I'm going to go, But I said, yeah, it's midweek. Just check in. Let's go. Let's take a look. See if they got a commitment or something. I mean, I think it was like July, mid-July or something like that. I forget when it was that we went. It was over the summer. I'm like, just check in. Just see what's going on. See what's shaking on the website. It wasn't even a, check Twitter, check Facebook type of thing. Just check Panther-Lair.com. Sit down. Click, www.Panther-Lair.com. Enter. Loading. Screen pops up. Jabal Sheard arrested. Click. Exit out. Leave the business center. Don't look at it again. These are the kind of things that happen when I go out of town, when I go on vacation. And part of it is poor planning on my part. I mean, in previous years, we've gone on vacation in June, and June is when recruiting happens, right? And we'll go the second week of June, and Pitt will get 3 commitments or 4 commitments. And much to the chagrin of my wife and other family members, I'm sitting there on my computer trying to call whoever, Chase Pine or Reuben Flowers or somebody. For some reason, I have this memory of sitting in a hotel lobby trying to get Chase Pine on the phone after he committed that June. But it's what happens. And so it's almost a running joke on Panther-Lair.com that if I'm going out of town, there's going to be news that breaks. Well, I got lucky. There was nothing this week. This past week when I was out of town, there was nothing to potentially draw my attention away. And I checked in from time to time on the message boards, but there was no major news. I mean, a few Pitt targets went to other schools or seemed to drift away, or maybe announced a top 10 that included Pitt or didn't include Pitt. But I mean, there were no commitments. There were no decommitments. No one got arrested. No one got kicked off the team. No one got suspended. There was none of that. So we got lucky in that regard. I got lucky in that regard because it made my vacation a little less stressful. And I have to say that knowing that there were no official visits, knowing that recruiting probably was going to be kind of calm, it was nice to be able to, you walk down to the beach and not sort of have this looming sense of dread of when I get back, is my phone going to be full of like 32 text messages and Twitter messages and whatnot about some news that broke. So it's kind of nice to not have that concern looming out there. And Pitt actually hasn't gotten a commitment. I mean, really, you look at it. Let me bring up the commitment list. I mean, the last commitment was Stephon Hall, and that was on June 5th. And he was one of 2 recruits to commit to Pitt in June this year, Stephon Hall and Khalil Anderson. Out of the 16 commitments they've gotten, only 2 in June. And I mean, we're sitting here, I'm taping this podcast on Tuesday night, the 23rd, so we've got another week of this month left. It wouldn't be a surprise at all if they come out of June with no more than 3 commitments and potentially even 2, which would be the fewest. Goodness, I'd have to look back. I'd have to track back more than 10 years, I would say, to find another June where Pitt got 3 or fewer commitments. But that's the way it stands now because of the many things that the coronavirus and the pandemic and the quarantine and the lockdowns and all the, of the many things that have been affected, college football recruiting has certainly been one of them. And it's effectively, I don't want to say it has killed June as a recruiting month, but what it did is that extended dead period from the NCAA and then all the high schools closing down led, I think, a lot of recruits to just sort of being, I don't want to say committing because they were bored, but a lot of guys sat around in April and May and said, you know what? I know where I want to go. I'm going to commit. And so Pitt ends up getting, they got 16 commitments. They got 2 in June and 3, January and before, so that's 5. So they got 11 commitments in April and May. I mean, an unprecedented total. And that's been, it's a direct effect of this situation. And I mean, look, as long as everything's back to normal next year, I think we'll be back to normal in terms of how this news will go down and of how events will proceed, where there won't be as many spring commitments and June will be the crazy month. But for now, man, this has been a weird year, and and June excitement has suffered, but it was replaced by April and May excitement. So Pitt's sitting at 16 commitments right now, and I thought we'd just look at the class real quick and think about where they're going to go from there. I should, of course, first talk about the cold stuff, right? And I got to say, I've got the the Voodoo Ranger IPA. Just the regular old classic IPA from Voodoo Ranger, from New Belgium, of course. And we drink a lot of different forms of Voodoo Ranger on this podcast. Love them all. But there's nothing like the original, the OG IPA. And I got to say, I was drinking this stuff all week at the beach. Not all just the Voodoo Ranger IPA. I had like the mix pack. So I had like 4 or 5. I think I actually had 6 different varieties of Voodoo Ranger or New Belgium at the beach. Finished them all too. I get about a case worth of that. Plus, your standard, your beach beers. Things that are a little bit easier to drink, a little more watery, but those have their place. Sitting by the pool, relaxing at night, Voodoo Ranger was the way to go because it's an outstanding IPA. So you look at this recruiting class, 16 guys on board. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, 4 offensive linemen, 2 defensive ends, 1 linebacker, 2 cornerbacks, and 2 safeties. So sitting at 16. And when you talk about what they really need to finish this class, what they need to fill it in, I mean, you obviously tight end, but dear Lord, we've talked about this many times. I'll believe they can recruit tight ends when they recruit tight end, and I say that, I say that and ha ha ha, it's real funny, but I mean the reality is, they had one recruiting class, the 2017 class, when they recruited 3 guys. They were able to get tight ends in that class. They got Jason Collier in the 2018 class. He thought he was a tight end. He ultimately moved to the offensive line, which I think was a move everyone saw coming. But they got Kai Wright in the 2019 class. And then they've also gotten, 4 graduate transfers plus 1 regular transfer. So, they're not completely inept at attracting players at the tight end position. It's just been a real slog. They got nobody in 2015. They got nobody in 2016. They got Collier in 2018, but he moved to offensive tackle, which everybody knew was coming. They got nobody in 2019. Well, no, I'm sorry. They got Kai Wright in 2019. And this past year, they didn't get any high school guys. They got Daniel Marega, the junior college player, and they got Lucas Kroll, one of these grad transfers, following in the footsteps of Nakia Griffin-Stewart and Will Gregg and Matt Flanagan, and ultimately Chris Clark, who came as a regular transfer. I do think Lucas Kroll has a chance to be the best out of the tight ends that Pitt has gotten in the grad transfer market. I think he can actually. I think he can be good. I think he can be better than any of the guys that came before him. Obviously, he's got to catch the ball, which would put him ahead of the group last year. But he's a big guy who can run, and I think just showcasing the tight end could do wonders for tight end recruiting. Now they go out and Kroll catches 40 passes and 5 touchdowns, and they don't get a 5-star tight end in the class. People are going to say, "Well, I thought it was going to help." Well, it might take a little time. You might have to do it a little more than just one season. But having some tape that you can show to kids and say, "Look, we will throw to the tight ends, and we will have, and they will make plays." We tried to throw to them in 2019, and the guys couldn't catch anything. In 2020, we threw it. We got this grad transfer in here. He's a big kid who can run. We threw it to him a bunch. He caught it a bunch. He made a lot of plays. He scored touchdowns. That can help your cause. And we talk about reasons why Pitt has struggled so much to recruit tight ends. That's part of it. The offense hasn't exactly showcased tight ends. The offense hasn't looked appealing for a tight end to play in. It wasn't appealing to play in, tight end in Sean Watson's offense. Matt Canada's offense must have looked good to tight ends because they signed 3 that year. The 2016 season preceded signing day 2017 when they signed Charles Reeves and Tyler Sear and Grant Kerrigan. Jim Chaney's offense, I don't know. They didn't get any high school guys out of it. They got Chris Clark based on Jim Chaney's offense. Watson's offense, like I said, didn't show much for tight ends to get excited about. In last year's offense, if you're just looking at the production of the tight ends and you're a high school tight end, you're not going to say, "Wow, that's the place I want to go to play." They're going to give me the ball. Even though if you look a little closer, and that's the coach's job, is to get recruits to look a little closer. They would see that the opportunities are there, but obviously that's it's easier said than done. And that's more research than a recruit should have to do to be convinced that you're going to throw the ball to the tight ends. Kids should be able to see it pretty clearly. You should be able to put on the film and say, "This is what the tight ends do in our offense," and have a bunch of video clips of tight ends standing in the end zone holding the ball, scoring touchdowns. So they need at least one of those, maybe 2. They need some defensive tackles. I think they could potentially use 2. A guy like Elliot Donald's out there who's a defensive end but could move inside to defensive tackle. I think they're going to need to get 1 or 2 of those guys. And they've already got 2 cornerbacks, but we've talked about this. I think they're going to try and get 2 more. I think they're going to try and go for 4 corners in this class. I think even if it means only taking 2 safeties or only taking 1 linebacker, I think they're content to do that if they can get 4 cornerbacks in this class, because we've talked about the depth of this, at this position and how that situation is developed. I think I talked about that a lot 2 weeks ago on the last live stream about, because it was right after Khalil Anderson and Noah Bigelow had committed. And I said, look, we tracked back the history. We traced back the history of the corners and why the depth is what it is, but they have a depth issue and they need to restock with this class. Now, would they go into this? Would they be settled on this class with only 1 linebacker or only 2 defensive ends? I don't know. I think they might have the luxury of doing that. You know, I mean, look at defensive ends. They signed 3 DNs in this last year's class, this 2020 class, the guys who were coming in as freshmen this year, Emmanuel Belgrave and Sam Williams and Dayon Hayes. And then they signed 4 in the 2019 class. Now, you know, you might have one of those guys, one of those 4 move to defensive tackle, or one of those 4 move to offensive tackle. But even if you get 5 over 2 classes, that's pretty solid. I don't know if you need to go more beyond the 2 that they signed, that they've already got committed this year, and you know, Nakai Johnson and Trevion Stevenson. And linebacker, they signed 3 guys last year. Well, I mean, 3 guys in this 2020 class, guys who were freshmen this year, Solomon DeShields and Bengali Kamara and A.J. Roberts. And I think that's a really good trio. I mean, we're saying this ahead of those guys ever playing a snap. DeShields and Roberts had some time in spring camp, but I mean, they obviously haven't played in any games. We'll find out what they really are, but I think that's a really good trio of linebackers. Maybe one of the better classes of linebackers Pitt has signed in quite some time. You might go back to the 2003 class, I think it was, that had H.B. Blades and Clint Session, and I think Chris McKillop might have signed as a linebacker in that class. You know, you might have to go back that far to find another group of linebackers that looks as good as this one does coming in as freshmen. So they got 3 in that 2020 class, and then they signed 3 more in that 2019 class, and Brandon George and Leslie Smith and Servassier Dennis. And, you know, I think DeShields and Kamara and Roberts look better than George, Smith, and Dennis, but that doesn't mean I think, those 3 in the 2019 class stink or anything like that. I think there's some good potential in that group too. But when you sign 6 linebackers over the course of 2 classes, you probably don't want to only take 1 linebacker in the 2021 class, but you could get away with it. You know, your numbers should be padded enough that you can get away with just 1 in this class. Now, if they do what I just said, if they could get 2 tight ends and 2 defensive tackles and 2 cornerbacks, that would put them at 22 recruits for the class, which, quite frankly, it's a lot, but I think it leaves some wiggle room to add another player or 2. Maybe even as many as 3. I don't know if they'll go as high as 25, but I think they'll go at least 1, if not 2, over that number of 22. If they do that, that could open up room for another linebacker or, you know, somebody who's really a top target for the staff at defensive end or offensive line or wide receiver. I could see them doing that if they have an opportunity to do it, if they can get someone really good. But, I mean, I think the focus right now is on tight ends and cornerbacks, with defensive tackle being sort of third on the focus list behind that, because they have recruited that position well, and they've got some depth there. They've got some depth at DN too. But with 2 guys already committed, I don't think they need to push too hard on that position just right now. So that's where if you're keeping track of Pitt recruiting right now, if you're watching, to see what the coaches are doing or want to see where their focus is going to be, look at tight ends and cornerbacks. That's not necessarily what the next commitment is going to be. I don't know who the next commit is going to be. It's not necessarily going to be a tight end or a corner, but those are the positions that I would really focus on. And I think there's some guys that we've talked about on Panther-Lair.com that are top targets for the staff at those spots. It's just a matter of whether they can pull any of them in. Let's jump into the live stream here. Get a few of the comments. People have been piling in lots of comments, and we really appreciate that. Andrew Callahan, first comment, points out, no hat today, looking fresh. Yes, I got a haircut. I finally got a haircut, so we don't need to wear the Rivals hat anymore. It's just, that's it was time, and I think on the first week or 2 weeks, whenever they went to the green phase, when the haircut places were open again, I made sure to get out there and get one done. So, yeah, I like the Rivals hat, but it's not my preference to wear a hat all the time. I appreciate you noticing it, Andrew. Barry Onyx 122 says, "Hi, Chris. Throwing it back to a few weeks ago, what conference Pitt belongs in? Outside of fantasy conferences, I favor the ACC because institutional fits like Georgia Tech, Miami, and Syracuse." Yeah, I hear you on that. They're actually, so a few weeks ago, I think we got into a conversation here on the live stream and talked about what conference Pitt should be in, or something about conference realignment. I forget how it came up. And I said that, look, I think the best conference for Pitt would be the Big Ten. I think that's where Pitt belongs. And actually, Baryonyx 122 actually has a follow-up comment where he says the Big Ten would be nice geographically and for driving, but it's nice having access to Florida and Virginia for recruiting and avoiding the Big Ten East competitively. I think we're home. Yeah, so I don't think the ACC is a bad fit for Pitt. I guess I should say that right off the bat. I like, sort of professionally and personally, I like some of the trips in the ACC. I really like going to Virginia. I like going to Virginia Tech. I think those are doable drives. They're not bad drives. I don't particularly like going into the state of North Carolina all that much. It's kind of a pain in the butt to get there, although I've sort of smoothed that process out with driving and staying in a place like Beckley, West Virginia or something. Sort of cut the drive in half. It's like an 8-hour drive to Duke and UNC. But I cut that drive in half, and so it's not too bad. I don't mind going, you fly to Miami. Where else do they even play? I mean, in Syracuse. I mean, that's a little bit longer of a drive than I would like. It's kind of annoying driving up in upstate New York. I've gone through that before. I'm not going to get into that now. So I think the AC. Oh, and I like going to Atlanta. I like Atlanta a lot as a city. I think that's a fun place to be. Now, what I would say, I guess, is... So I like the ACC. I like Pitt being in this conference. I think it's a good fit. There's just something about the Big Ten, and not just the Big Ten, but the Midwest and the region where you would be playing geographically and culturally that just seems like a better fit for Pitt. And like I said, I really kind of realized this over a couple of different things. 2017, driving up to Penn State. 2018 driving out to Notre Dame, and then 2019 driving up to Penn State again. And being at those places and walking through the parking lots and just the feel of the drive there. I mean, it's a different drive if you drive across Ohio and into Indiana, or you drive through, drive out 22 and up 99. It's different than what you're going to get when you drive down through West Virginia into Virginia and into North Carolina. It's a different vibe. It's a different fit. It's a different feel. And I spent all my time in Pittsburgh, obviously. And it seems to me that it just feels like more of a fit in those Midwestern areas, culturally, in terms of vibe, whatever you want to call it. It just seems like a better fit there. Now, I mean, you raise the point of institutional fit, where a school like Georgia Tech or Miami is like Pitt because it's in a pro city. Those schools are in pro cities, and they're sort of similar types of schools. Or Syracuse is in an urban environment, as opposed to the Big Ten, where you have the land grant schools. I mean, that's a totally different animal. Absolutely, Pitt does not fit in that regard, but it just seems to make sense to me that Pitt would be a Big Ten school. That said, the ACC is perfectly good conference. I don't think Pitt should be in any hurry to try to get out of it. I don't think they are in any hurry to try and get out of it. I think there are a lot of upsides and advantages to being in the Big Ten, to being in the ACC, excuse me. And I think Pitt is in a perfect landing, or a really good landing spot. And I don't want them to go anywhere anytime soon. The only upside would be that with the Big Ten. Even then, I was going to say there was all driving, but even then, you still have to fly to Minnesota. You still have to fly to Wisconsin. You still have to, I guess you could drive probably to Ann Arbor and East Lansing, but I've flown when Pitt played at Iowa a couple times. I flew out there. So, and I would fly to Illinois. So, there's a lot of flights. It's not even an advantage there, I guess, depending on what division Pitt would get put in. But that's just my thought. You asked about it, so that's what I thought. Josh Newark, when I was talking about some of the Friday Conversation podcasts we've had, Josh Newark said, you should play the absolute heel card and interview Steve Peterson. And I'm going to be honest with you, Josh. I'll be perfectly honest. The thought crossed my mind, and I don't think he would do it. I don't even know if he would answer, I don't even know if he would politely decline the request. But the thought crossed my mind actually earlier today, because I was kind of trying to plan out some guests, trying to think of some people who would be really interesting to talk to. And by golly, you can absolutely bet that name came to mind. And I think it would be fantastic. I think it would be a really, really fascinating interview subject, a person to talk to. But I have no doubt whatsoever that would get turned down. But maybe we'll try. Dale Gribble says, I wouldn't mind hearing from Rod Rutherford. And yeah, that would be interesting. I think Rod could have some interesting things to say. He was always more of a soft-spoken guy. Didn't really get too talkative. But I think he could have some interesting things to say because he not only was obviously a very good player at Pitt, but he's a local guy, a City League product who, chose to stay home at Pitt. And then later was on the coaching staff, at least as a graduate assistant. And so I think there's some really some interesting angles there. Let's see here. Anthony Scaramastro says, hope you didn't get coronavirus on vacation. Stay away from Clemson. Thank you, Anthony. I hope I didn't get it as well. We tried to be very careful in what we did. And quite frankly, the great thing about going to the Outer Banks, Anthony, is you get a house, right? You go to the grocery store once or twice. You load up on all your groceries, and you don't really have to do anything else. You don't have to go to restaurants. You don't have to go, and we don't, and we've been to the Outer Banks a bunch of times. We don't really go to restaurants to eat very much, if at all. We don't go to movies or shows or tourist attractions. We go to the beach, and it's very easy to keep your distance there. And we swim in the pool at the house. And you stay in the house. So unless someone in the house came with it, we don't. I think I should be just fine. And yeah, I'm staying away from Clemson. I have no inclination to go into South Carolina. Leon Moore 23 has a bunch of questions. He says, I haven't heard of any positive cases for Pitt. Is that true? And what are your expectations if there is a season? I was hopeful, but now concerned again. Yeah, I haven't heard of any positive cases for Pitt either. If there was a school in the country, or at least in the ACC, or at least in the Coastal Division, who would absolutely go to great lengths to not release that information, I believe it would be Pitt, considering we can't even get the most, insignificant and least incendiary information out of the University of Pittsburgh Athletic Department and its football program. I highly doubt they will be releasing any information like that. I could be wrong. They could come out with a press release as soon as this podcast ends or sometime on Wednesday, or hell, while we're even talking here. They could put out a press release that they've had 4 positive cases or something. I highly doubt that's going to happen. I think if there are positive cases, Pitt is not going to tell us about them. It's going to take some actual investigative journalism and see if we can find someone to talk. You get to a certain point where you sort of assume any large group like this probably has some positive cases. We haven't heard of any yet. We'll see what happens. What are my expectations if there is a season? Well, expectations about Pitt's performance or expectations of what a season will look like? I think, as far as the latter question, I think what we'll see, the steps we will see will consist of a continuing decline in fans and how many fans are allowed to go to games. I think they're going to I think they're going to continue to drop the percentages. I think it'll move to a game with no fans before it becomes, a reduced season, before they start playing only, a half season or only conference games. I think they will expire every avenue possible before there are fewer than 12 games played in the 2020 season, because the money's in the product. The money is in the content. The money is in the game being played and put on television. So that's my thought. I think you're gonna have to go pretty far down the road of negative outcomes before you get to the point where games are not being played. Now, again, what I always tie it to is college, and I see that Pitt is giving students the option to have classes remotely, to do online learning. I think that's interesting. I think what I'm going to be watching, what we'll be watching all fall, is if the kids who are on campus stay on campus. If if you get to a point where the students are sent home, if you get to a point in October where you're saying, or God forbid in September, where the university says, okay, we're getting a rise in cases, students have to leave campus, like they said in March. You know what I mean? If they send the kids home and say no students on campus, all remote learning, there's going to be the Pitt will obviously have a world of problems on their hands. But I get back into that issue of, do you then compel the student athletes to stay on campus when everyone else has been sent home? Okay, so if you end up sending students home, how are you going to demand that the football team stays and plays its games? They would choose to, but how do you demand it? How do you compel them? How do you make it required? And I think that's a really, really tough scenario. So, people ask me all the time, like, what do you think is going to happen this fall? What do you think? Are they going to play the games? Are they going to do this again? I don't know. And it'll be August 1st, and we still won't know. And it'll be, it could be September 1st, and we don't know. And it could be October 1st, and we won't know how the whole season is going to play out until you get to December and you've played 12 games. When they kick off game number 12, when they kick off the season finale, then I will know that they've found a way to play all 12 games. I think it's going to be a situation that's up in the air all year long, with the possibility of the season stopping at any point. And I think they will go to great lengths to make sure they get 12 games in. But it's always going to be that other shoe dropping is always going to be looming out there. And so it's going to be nerve-wracking, but if they play, I think Pitt can be really good. And Leon Moore 23 follows up, picking Pitt to win the Coastal ahead of North Carolina, win the tiebreaker. What do you think? There's no reason Pitt shouldn't win the Coastal this year. There's no reason they shouldn't win 10 games this year. We've talked about this before. That was last week's podcast, Leon. I hope you got a chance to check it out, because I talked about what this team should do. When you look at the schedule, when you look at the personnel, there's no reason they should, win less than 9 at a minimum. 8 at a bare disappointing minimum. 9, really, and potentially 10. And compete for and potentially win the Coastal. There's no reason that shouldn't happen. They're good enough to do it. And they've got the schedule to do it. Are they going to win a tiebreaker against North Carolina? I don't know. A game was mighty close last year. And Carolina's only going to be better too. So it should be another good game. And then Leon Moore has more questions. He says, do you think Nike will get the waiver? Now, Nike is Nike Sibande, a graduate transfer guard from Miami, or not graduate transfer guard, a transfer guard from Miami of Ohio. He's played 3 years at Miami, played relatively well, averaged 13.9 points per game last year. He's been, an all-conference player at points in his career. Seems like a nice player, a little bit redundant with what they have on the roster, save for his experience. He's going to need to try and get a waiver for this year. I don't know what the rationale would be behind applying for a waiver to play this year. Because, under transfer rules, he's only played 3 years at Miami of Ohio. He would have to sit out a year and then have 1 year left to play. But they'll apply for a waiver just like everybody who transfers does, because, at this point, the NCAA is so inconsistent about who it gives waivers to. If you don't apply, you are not doing your due diligence. It said that about Joey Yellen, who we just had a picture of here on the live stream maybe a minute ago. I said that about Joey Yellen. Should they apply for a waiver? Shouldn't they? What difference does it make? Kenny Pickett's still here. If you don't apply for a waiver, you are doing a disservice, I think, because the NCAA is giving them out in so many different situations that you might as well go for it, because why wouldn't you? What do you have to lose? The worst that can happen is they turn you down. The best that can happen is you have the guy available for this year. Now, I think that's where Nike Sibande really can help the most, is this year, when they need that guard depth that we've talked about so much, where you've got Xavier Johnson, you've got Ethel Horton, but you need more guards to come in. You know what I mean? You need somebody else to play them. Femi Odekal as the freshman coming in, but you need another guard who can come in and play, an experienced player, an older guy, ideally, and that's what Nike Sibande can represent. I don't think you're expecting him to come in and be your lead guard, your number one player, your leading scorer. But you do want him to come in and at the very least give you depth and something of a rotation at guard. So if guys get in foul trouble or a guy gets hurt or he's just not playing well and he needs a few minutes on the bench to get his head together, you've got options. And that's what Nike Sibande could give Pitt this year, an option at guard. I think if he has to sit a year and not play until next season, I think that it becomes less of an exciting pickup. But I think if he can help them this year, it's a good boost to the lineup and boost to the rotation is my thought. Let's see. Scroll down here. You know what else I wanted to talk about, actually? There's a few other questions there. I'll try and get to those guys. But I wanted to talk about something else because it's a topic I've been thinking about. I'll probably write about it in the 321 column this week on Panther-Lair.com. And that's about recruiting. We all follow recruiting here, of course. And I mean, that's a big part of what Panther-Lair.com does. You can see the website name right there, Panther-Lair.com. Also, if you're watching the live stream, click subscribe if you don't mind. You like the video while you're watching, but click subscribe to the Panther-Lair.com YouTube channel. We'd appreciate that. Trying to run those numbers up, like I say. Want to get it, see how far we can push it. So do that and tell a friend to go like it on the YouTube channel as well. But I was thinking about recruiting this week. We've been counting down recruiting classes, 2003 to 2017, 15 classes over the last 2 weeks. This is the final week. We're going, classes 5 through 1. Number 5 was on Monday, number 4 on Tuesday, and then 3, 2, 1. We'll count them down to find the best recruiting class of the last, well, not of the last 15 years, but from 2003 to 2017, because we want to base it on what these guys did in college. And so I feel like it was fair for the 2018 class to be compared to, a class that has finished its eligibility. Those guys have only had 2 years on campus. So cut it off at 2017. Those guys have had 3 years on campus. They're entering their 4th year. I think we can render some judgments. And actually, that 2017 class was the one that came up on Tuesday as the number 4 class out of that group as we've been counting them down. And I looked at that class, and that was the highest rated class that Pat Narduzzi recruited, at least on this ranking. The 2016 class, according to the Rivals rankings, was ranked highest nationally. It was a top 30 class. I think it was number 29. This 2017 class came in at number 38 nationally. But as I looked at that class of 2017, I ended up putting it ahead of the 2016 class based on what those guys have done, because it's pretty remarkable what they ended up producing. We've got 10 starters on this year's team, this 2020 team, that are going to come from that 2017 class. Guys like Paris Ford, Damari Mathis, Jason Pinnock, Jalen Twyman, Kenny Pickett, Cam Bright, Carter Warren, A.J. Davis, if he holds on to the starting job at running back. Probably Gabe Hoyer, Carson Van Lin. Both of those guys were in that class. One of them is probably going to be a starter, if not both. Deslin Alexandra maybe won't be a starter this year, just because of the incredible depth at defensive end, but he was a starter all year last year and played really well. Kirk Christodoulou, a punter. Again, another guy who was a starter, who was a scholarship player in that 2017 class. There's 24 recruits they signed. 10 of them are going to be starters this year. That's a pretty good hit rate, and it's actually been, the class has been really good about attrition as well. That very minimal attrition. Only 7 guys from that class are gone. Charles Reeves, Kyle Nunn, Philippe Carter, Darian Street. Wait, Philippe Carter? Hold on. No, Cam Carter. I'm sorry. I just wrote down Carter, and I was like, wait, Philippe Carter wasn't in that class. He was 2018. Cam Carter, the defensive tackle who came from a JUCO. Darian Street, Albert Tucker, Tyler Sear, and Jerry Drake. 7 guys. 5, and really 2 of them, Tucker and Drake, were medical. Basically retired for medical reasons. So it's essentially 5 out of the other 18, or 5 out of the other 22 are gone. That's pretty good. You hate to lose 5 guys or 7 guys from a class, but that's actually not a bad number. When you look at the 2016 class, they signed 24 kids. 13 of them left Pitt without finishing their eligibility. And none of those guys went to the NFL. They were all transfers or got dismissed. And you say, okay, well, the 2016 class, they also have finished their eligibility. They're all in their 5th year now. 2017 has another year or two where more guys could leave. You're right. But if you even look at the 2018 class, right, they're a year newer than the 2017 guys. 4 of those guys from the 2018 class are already gone. And Michael Salahuddin, Philippe Carter, Ricky Town, and Cameron O'Neal. I mean, Town would have been done anyway, but he left before his eligibility ended. So that's 4. The 2017 class, when they've been here a year longer, really has only had 5 guys transfer or get dismissed or, leave the team. So the attrition rate is low. The success rate is high. They ended up, Paris Ford is a star. Jalen Twyman is a star. Mathis and Pinnock are really good. Cam Bright is going to be a good starter this year. Kenny Pickett is going to be a 3rd-year starter this year. I think Carter Warren can take a step forward as a starting left tackle this year. I think Deslin Alexander was a revelation last season. That 2017 class ended up being pretty darn good. And I think by the end of this season, we'll think even higher of it. I think we'll look at that class even more fondly. But what's remarkable to me about this, and here's the larger point that I ultimately wanted to get to. On signing day 2017, even though I think Jalen Twyman announced on signing day, made his announcement public that he was going to Pitt, so there's a little bit of excitement, and A.J. Davis did as well. So there was excitement there because he was a 4-star running back prospect. Even though there was some excitement on signing day, there was a lot of disappointment too. Because that 2017 class was the year when Pitt kind of got killed in the Whippeal. When they signed Tyler Sear, they signed Paris Ford, obviously the best player in the Whippeal that year. They signed Gabe Hoy and Grant Kerrigan in that 2017 class from the Whippeal. So they got some guys from the Whippeal. But they missed on Lamont Wade, C.J. Thorpe, Donovan Jeter, Kurt Heinisch, David Adams, Josh Lugg, Kenny Robinson. I'm shocked that Pitt even offered, how many is that? 7, 8, more than 10 Whippeal kids. I don't think they've offered more than 10 Whippeal kids in any class since then. And they missed on, that's 7 guys to Notre Dame and Penn State and Michigan, West Virginia. But it wasn't just the Whippeal guys. I mean, that stung, and people were really down about that. But then there was also, that was the year of the defensive ends, where Pitt tried to load up the class with defensive ends. They wanted to get like 2, 3, 4 defensive ends in the class, and they had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 defensive ends take official visits in December and January. And they ended up signing one of those guys, Deslin Alexander, who ended up being good. No question about it. But they missed on Victor Dimukuje, Taiwan Garbett, Nathan Proctor, Kofi Wardlow, Guy Thomas, Zion DeBose. And, Thomas is transferred and Proctor transferred, and some of those guys have been better than others. But that's not really the point. The point is that on signing day 2017, in February of 2017, the first Wednesday in February of 2017, people were pretty down on Pitt recruiting because of all the locals who went away and all these defensive ends that Pitt missed out on. 3 years later, we look at this recruiting class and we say, that was the best class Narduzzi signed in terms of what these guys have done in college. Now, 2019 may end up being better. 2020 may end up being better. I personally think as recruits, looking at these guys just as prospects coming out of high school, I think the 2020 class does look better than, any class. I think the 2020 class looks like Narduzzi's best class. But with the benefit of hindsight, and context of seeing what these guys have done in college, this 2017 class right now, for me, is number 1. I mean, 2016 has some really good players, some good contributors. Obviously, DeMar Hamlin is a big one. Maurice French was really good. But 2017 has got the star power, low attrition rate, and I think depth, too, in the class. And it's just funny because we were so down on it in February of 2017. And I guess if I'm getting at anything here, other than just a meaningless stroll down memory lane, I guess I'm saying that, we absolutely should follow this stuff. We should pay attention to this stuff. We should read recruiting articles. You really should. You should go to Panther-Lair.com and read everything there right now. You should be on Panther-Lair.com if you're a Pitt fan. You want to follow recruiting. Well, if you're a Pitt fan, you should want to follow recruiting. If you want to follow Pitt recruiting, you should go to Panther-Lair.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. So where else would you go for great Pitt recruiting coverage, for the best Pitt recruiting coverage? So we have to pay attention to this stuff because recruiting is the lifeblood, right? I mean, recruiting is where it all comes from. But at the same time, we also have to keep in mind that our opinions on these guys may change in a few years. And we may be down on missing out on this recruit, may feel great about getting this recruit, but all of it should come with the caveat of, well, let's see what happens. Because this class, this 2017 class, has turned out to be really good and is going to be a big part of the foundation of whatever success Pitt has in 2020, which they should have considerable success, as we've said. And if they do, a big part of it's going to come from this class. It's going to come from Paris Ford and Jalen Twyman, Damari Mathis and Jason Pinnock, Kenny Pickett, Cam Bright, ideally Carter Warren and Gabe Hoy, Carson Van Linde. Getting two of those three, or all three of them to be really good, that would be ideal because that could really do wonders for what this team can do. But I think you follow my point. You know, sometimes, I mean, yeah, you follow it. You have to follow this stuff. You have to be, you know, and if you're going to follow it closely, you're going to be passionate about it. But you also have to keep that perspective that, well, let's also see what they're doing 3 years from now and how we feel about this class 3 years from now. All right. Let's check here on this, on the live stream here. Royce Beacom, have you already determined the number one recruiting class in your in this ranking that I'm talking about? Yeah, Royce, I laid them all out. Before I wrote the first article, before I started publishing and started with number 15, I ranked them all out. I looked at all the classes. I have a spreadsheet with all the recruiting classes and the stars, you know, that we're talking about between 2003 to 2017, and which guys became really good and which guys became solid contributors and which guys were starters and all this kind of stuff. And then I ranked all the classes there so I knew where I was going. And even then, as I went along, I ended up changing a few of them. But you know, it was it's all been planned out. So I know where this is going, what number one is going to be. You might be able to guess what number one is going to be. We only have 3 left: Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's what 3 classes are left? I had so many notebooks around that I write different things on. So I always have to remember which notebook. Oh, we have 3 classes left: 2006, 2007, and 2013. So you can guess on those. How about that? We'll leave it on a guessing game for today. We'll leave the podcast on that one, and you can guess how you think those 3 will be ranked: the 2006, 2007, and 2013 classes. Which one? How you would rank them 3, 2, 1. So be curious to hear what you think is going to happen, and then of course keep an eye on Panther-Lair.com to find out on Wednesday what number 3 is, on Thursday what number 2 is, and then on Friday what number 1 is. It's Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Like I said, I think it's the best source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, we cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course we have message boards where these kind of conversations we have on the podcast, we have these conversations all day, every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are people on Panther-Lair.com message boards talking about Pitt sports. If you're watching this, live stream, or you're listening to this podcast, then you're a Pitt sports fan. You probably like to talk to people about Pitt sports. You should go on the website Panther-Lair.com and read about Pitt sports and talk on the message boards about Pitt sports with other Pitt sports fans. It's the place to be, if I do say so myself. Make sure you like Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Pantherlaircom. You can find it right there. Just go on there, click subscribe. We won't blow you up with notifications or anything like that, but you'll know when we're going live to discuss things, either for our Tuesday night live streams or for the, sometimes we'll bust out some quick recruiting analysis after Pitt gets some commitments. We'll do that too, and you'll know about it because you'll get a notification. So go to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to subscribe to Panther-Lair on YouTube. Of course, this comes out as a podcast on Wednesday. We do the live stream every Tuesday night at 8:30. On Friday, we'll have the Friday Conversation podcast. We'll have a guest talking about Pitt sports, someone connected to the Panthers one way or the other. And go look for those in the archives because I think they're all pretty interesting. The previous episodes we've had, Curtis Martin was one of the best guests I've ever interviewed. And so I definitely think you should check that out. It's gotten rave reviews from everyone who's listened to it. And then on Saturday morning, 8 a.m. on 93.7 The Fan, we'll have the Panthers Insider Show. We do that for an hour, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh. So make sure you go check that out and check out the website. Thanks for tuning in to the live stream and offering some conversation here on Tuesday night. And thanks for listening to the podcast. If you're just doing the audio version, make sure you go to the website. We'll talk to you there on the message boards. And otherwise, have a great week and have a safe week. Thanks.